So the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act 1956 has 3 chapters and 30 sections. The first chapter is the preliminary chapter, second is the adoption, and third is maintenance. Now, what does the preamble of the act talks about? It says that the act is the act to amend and codify the law relating to adoption and maintenance among Hindus. So this act is applicable on Hindus. Now, this act may be called the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act 1956. It extends to the whole of India. Earlier, it was not applicable on the Jammu and Kashmir, but by the Reorganization Act of 34 of 2019, Section 95, this Jammu Kashmir part was omitted, and now it applies to the residents of Jammu and Kashmir as well, the Hindu residents of the Jammu and Kashmir. Now, on whom does this act apply? Section 2 talks about the application of the act. So it applies to any person who is Hindu by religion in any of its form or development, including a Veerashaiva, Lingayat, or a follower of the Brahmo, Pratna, or Arya Samaj. So if you belong to a Veerashaiva community or a Lingayat community, or you follow Brahmo Samaj, Pratna Samaj, or Arya Samaj, then this act is applicable on you. B is to any person who is a Buddhist, Jain, Sikh by religion. So if you follow the Buddhist, Jaina, or Sikh religion, then also this act is applicable. The third is to any other person who is not a Muslim, Christian, Parsi, or Jew by religion, unless it is proved that any such person would not have been governed by the Hindu law or by any custom or usage or part of that law in respect of any of the matters dealt with herein if the act had not been passed. So if you every other person who doesn't belong to a Muslim, Christian, or Parsi or Jew community would come under Hindu, and this act would be applied on that person unless and until you show that you have been governed by some other set of rules or principles. Then you will be in the exception, or else this act would apply. Now the explanation, it says that the following persons are Hindu, Buddhist, Jains, or Sikh by religion, as the case may be. So any child, legitimate or illegitimate, both of whose parents are Hindu, Buddhist, Jainas, or Sikh. If both the parents are Hindu, Buddhist, Jaina, or Sikh, the child will be by default a Hindu, and this act would apply on that person. And uh, it doesn't matter whether the child is legitimate or illegitimate. Now, B is any child, legitimate or illegitimate, one of whose parent is a Hindu, Buddhist, Jaina, or Sikh. So one of the parent, if one of the parent is Hindu, Buddhist, Jaina, or Sikh, this act would apply. And who is brought up as a member of the tribe, community, group, or family. So one of the parents should belong to this community, these communities, and the child should be brought up in the manner of the in the manner in which the children from these communities are brought up. Now, second is BB, any child, legitimate or illegitimate, who has been abandoned both by his father and mother, or whose parentage is not known, and who is either case is brought up as a Hindu, Buddhist, Jaina, or Sikh. If both the parents have abandoned the child, and his parentage is not known, then if the child has been brought up as the according to the principles and religious beliefs followed by the either of these religion, then that child would be governed by this act, and he will be a Hindu. Now, the last one is C. Any person who is a convert or reconvert to the Hindu, Buddhist, Jaina, or Sikh religion. If somebody is a convert to these either of these four religion, then also this act would apply. Notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, nothing contained in this section shall apply to the members of any scheduled tribe within the meaning of clause 25 of article 366 of the constitution. Clause 25 of the article 366 defines scheduled tribe, unless the central government by notification in the official gazette otherwise directs. So this won't apply on scheduled tribes mentioned in the article 366 clause 25 of the constitution of India. Now the third and the last provision of this section 2 is the expression Hindu in any portion of this act shall be construed as if included a person who, though not a Hindu by religion, is nevertheless a person to whom this act applies by virtue of provisions contained in this section. So even if that person is not a Hindu according to the provisions, but is doesn't even come in the exceptions. The exception was you should not belong to a Muslim, Christian, Jew, or Parsi community. Then also this act will be applied. Now from section 2, a lot of MCQ can be formed. First is regarding who is a Hindu. Second is whether legitimate or illegitimate child both are included or not. And the third one is the scheduled tribe is there or not. So these are the MCQs that could be formed from this section. Moving on to section 3, it is the definition clause. The 3A defines custom and usage. Now this has been asked in previous examinations, and which section defines custom. So 3A is the answer. 3A is custom and usage signify any rule which, having been continuously and uniformly observed for a long time, keep that in mind, continuously and uniformly. These are the two keywords. Continuously and uniformly, observed for a long time, has been obtained the force of law among Hindu in any local area, uh, tribe, community, group, or family, provided that the rule is certain and not opposed to public policy. So the rule should be certain. It should not be unreasonable. It should not be opposed to public policy. Provided further that in the case of rule applicable only to a family, it has not been discontinued. If the rule is not applicable to a particular family only, it hasn't been discontinued by the family. So B is maintenance. It includes in all cases provision for food, clothing, residence, education, and medical attendance. Medical attendance is also included. Education is included in it. ये पूछ सकते हैं प्री में, ठीक है. And treatment in a case of an unmarried daughter, also the reasonable expenses of and incident to her marriage. If the daughter is unmarried, then her marriage expenses. Minor means a person who has not completed his or her age of 18 years. So who hasn't completed the age of 18 years is a minor. So these are three definitions which have been provided. Now moving on to second chapter, adoption. So section 5 talks about adoption to be regulated by this chapter. So no adoption shall be made after the commencement of this act by or to a Hindu except in accordance with the provisions contained in this chapter, and any adoption made in contravention of this act provision shall be void. Any adoption made in contravention of this act would be void. Now second is the next one is any adoption which is void shall neither create any right in the adoptive family in favor of any person which he or she could not have acquired except by reason of adoption, nor destroy the right of any person. So if the adoption is void, then obviously it won't create any right neither in the adopted kid nor in the family which has adopted. Now the next section is section 6, which talks about the requisites of a valid adoption. No adoption shall be valid unless the person adopting has the capacity and also the right to take in adoption. Person giving in adoption has the capacity to do so. Person adopted is capable of being taken in adoption, and adoption is made in compliance with the other conditions mentioned in this chapter. So this section is not important, neither is section 5. 7 is an important section. This has been asked in previous exams. So it talks about the capacity of a male Hindu to take in adoption. Capacity, male Hindu take in adoption. Okay, we have sections which will be dealing in who has the power to give in adoption, so keep that in mind. So section 7 talks about the capacity of a male Hindu to take in adoption. Any male Hindu who is of sound mind and is not a minor has the capacity to take on or a daughter in adoption, take a son or a daughter. Provided that if he has a wife living, he shall not adopt except with the consent of his wife. If he has a wife living, then consent of the wife is a must. You can't adopt a child without the consent of your wife, unless the wife has completely, but there are certain exceptions to it. If the wife has completely and finally renounced the world or has ceased to be a Hindu or has been declared by a court of competent jurisdiction to be unsound mind, if she has renounced the world or she is not a Hindu anymore or is of unsound mind and has been declared so by a competent court, then you don't need to get the permission from your wife in order to make adoption valid. Next is the explanation. If a person has more than one wife living at the time of adoption, the consent of all the wives is necessary unless the consent of any one of them is unnecessary for any reason specified in the preceding proviso. If the person has more than one wife living, then all the wives, permission from all the wives is necessary. You have to take permission from all the wife. Okay. Now the next section is section 8, capacity of a female Hindu to take in adoption. 7 was for a male Hindu. Now 8 is for a female Hindu. Any female Hindu who is of sound mind, who is not a minor, capacity to take a son, same as the male. Now provided that if she has a husband living, she shall not adopt a son or daughter except with the consent of her husband, unless the husband has completely and finally renounced the world or has ceased to be a Hindu or has been declared by a court of competent jurisdiction, exactly the same as it was in section 7. So 8 gives the female Hindu a capacity to adopt. Now next we have section 9, person capable of giving in adoption. Now who is capable of giving in adoption? Earlier we were talking about who can take. Now it's about who can give. So, no person except the father or mother or the guardian of a child shall have the capacity to give a child in adoption. Subject to the provisions of subsection 4, the father or the mother, if alive, shall have equal right to give a son or daughter in adoption. It's not like father or mother single-handedly can say you can adopt my child. Both should agree to the adoption, provided that such right shall not be exercised by either of them save with the consent of the other, unless one of them has completely. Now again there is this catch, that if either of them has completely and finally renounced the world, ceased to be a Hindu, been declared by a court of competent jurisdiction unsound mind. Clause 4, it says, where both the father and mother are dead, or have completely and finally renounced the world, or have abandoned the child, or have been declared by court of competent jurisdiction to be of unsound mind, or where the parentage of the child is not known, guardian of the child may give the child in adoption with the previous permission of the court. So these are the conditions. If both mother and father are dead, completely finally renounced the world, have abandoned the child, declared unsound mind, then or if the parentage of the child is not known, then only guardian can give the child in adoption, but with the previous permission of the court, including the guardian. So he can give the child in adoption to any other person or to himself as well, but these conditions should be present. Now the next is clause 5. Clause 5, it's before granting permission to a guardian under subsection 4, the court shall be satisfied that the adoption will be for the welfare of the child. This is very important. Welfare of the child, due consideration being for the this purpose given to the wishes of the child, having regard to the age and understanding of the child, and that the applicant for permission has not received or agreed to receive, that no person has made or given or agreed to make or give the applicant any payment or reward in consideration of the adoption except such court as may sanction. Okay. Now explanation attached to the purpose of this section, the expression father and mother do not include adoptive father and adoptive mother. A child once adopted cannot be given to another person, to another parent. Meaning thereby the adoptive father and mother have no right to give the child in adoption. Now guardian means a person having the care of the person of a child or both his person and property, and includes guardian appointed by the will of the child's father or mother, guardian appointed or declared by the court. Both the guardians will be allowed, testamentary guardian and the uh, guardian appointed by the court, both are included. Then we have court means the city civil court or district court within the local limits of whose jurisdiction the child um, to be adopted ordinarily resides. The child decides, keep that in mind. Now section 10 talks about persons who may be adopted. Now who can be adopted? No person shall be capable of being taken in adoption unless the following conditions are fulfilled, namely he or she is a Hindu, the child should belong to a Hindu religion, and he or she has not already been adopted, no further adoption, re-adoption is not possible. He or she has not been married unless there is a custom or usage applicable to the parties which permit persons who are married being taken in the adoption. He or she not has not completed the age of 15 years. So this is an important point. If the child is if the child has completed the age of 15 years, then the child cannot be given or taken in adoption unless there is a custom or usage applicable to the parties which permit the persons who have completed the age of 15 years being taken in adoption. So if there is no custom or usage, then a child who has completed the age of 15 years cannot be given in adoption or taken in adoption. Now the next section is other conditions for a valid adoption. In every adoption the following conditions must be complied with. Section 7, 8, 9, 10 are important. You have to keep the section in mind and the ingredient of these sections. Now section 11, in every adoption the following conditions must be complied with. If the adoption is of son, the adoptive father or mother by whom the adoption is made must not have a Hindu son, son's son, or son's son's son, whether by legitimate blood relationship or by adoption, living at the time of adoption. So 3, three stages: son, then son's son, and the son's son should not be alive if the father or mother are adopting a son. Second is, if the adoption is of daughter, the adoptive father or mother by whom the adoption is made must not have a Hindu daughter or son's daughter, whether by legitimate blood relationship or by adoption, living at the time of adoption. Important thing. So if you are adopting a son, then you should not have a son or grandson or great grandson living. And if you are adopting a daughter, then you should not have a daughter or granddaughter uh, granddaughter living. Okay. Then third is, if the adoption is by a male and the person to be adopted is a female, the adoptive father is at least 21 years older than the person to be adopted. This is very important. You have to keep this thing in mind. The age difference, 21 years older. So if a male is adopting a female, the age difference should be of 21 years. And if a female is adopting a male, then again 21-year older. The age difference between adoptive father or mother and the son or daughter, daughter and son, uh, should be 21 years. If you are adopting a child from the same sex of yours, then this difference is not required. But if you are adopting a child of the opposite sex, then there should be a difference of 21 years between the age of you and your adopted son or daughter. Now next is, the same child may not be adopted simultaneously by two or more person. One child can be adopted by one person only. So the sixth one is, the child to be adopted must be actually given and taken in adoption by the parent or guardian concerned or under their authority with intent to transfer the child from the family of its birth, or in the case of abandoned child or child whose parentage is not known, from the place or family where it has been brought up to the family of its adoption, provided that the performance of data homam shall not be essential to the validity of adoption. So in Hindu rituals, the performance of data homam was essential before the commencement of this act in order to adopt a child. But with the commencement of this act, this performance has been excluded. I mean, if you are not performing this data homam, also you can adopt a child, but actual give and take should be there. Moving on, the next section is effect of adoption. Again, this is important. An adopted child shall be in section 11. You have to keep these things in mind. That is the data homam thing that has been left out with. Data homam, it is not required now. Then you have to take actual remember, this actual give and take should be present. Then you have to keep in mind that the age difference should be of 21 years if the person is adopting a child from the opposite sex. And what was the other thing, that okay, this line of descendant, this should be kept in mind. These have been asked in previous year examinations. Now section 12, effect of adoption. So talking about the effect of adoption, an adopted child shall be deemed to be a child of his or her adoptive father or mother for all purpose with effect from the date of the adoption, and from such date all the ties of the child in the family of his or her adopted birth shall be deemed to be severed and replaced by those created by the adoption in the adopted family, provided that the child cannot marry any person whom he or she could not have married if he or she had. Now they are saying ki, all the ties, all the relationship that the adopted child had with his or her biological parents, or with the parents with whom he was earlier, will be severed and replaced by the ties and relationships to of the adoptive father and mother. Okay, now they will be his or her parents. But what is not going to end is, the child cannot marry any person whom he or she could not have married if he or she had continued in the family of his her birth. Still you can't marry those persons. Any property which is vested in the adopted child before the adoption shall continue to vest in such person subject to obligation. If you had any property which was vested in the child, that will remain vested. If any attaching to the ownership of such property, including the obligation to maintain relatives, if he or she had any obligation to maintain the relative, then he or she has to do that. The adopted child shall not divest any person of any estate which vested in him or her before the adoption. If there was any estate divested, you can't take that away. Now next is section 13, right of adoptive parents to dispose of their properties. Now in section 12, what was important was this exception clause. This was important for from the pre point of view. This was important. Now section 13, it says that right of adoptive parents to dispose of their properties subject to any agreement to the contrary, and adoption does not deprive the adoptive father or mother of the power to dispose of his or her property by transfer, inter vivos, or by will. Not important. Section 14 is determination of adoptive mother in certain cases. How the adoptive mother would be determined. So, where a Hindu who has a wife living adopts a child, she shall be deemed to be the adoptive mother. Where an adoption has been made with the consent of more than one wife, the senior most in the marriage among them shall be deemed to be adoptive mother and the others to be stepmother. Senior most will be the adoptive mother, and the remaining will be the stepmother, not the adoptive mother but the stepmother. Where a widower or a bachelor adopts a child, any wife whom he subsequently marries. So when he adopted the child, a widower or a bachelor adopted a child. When he adopted the child, he was a bachelor or a widower, and subsequently he marries someone. Then that woman would be her or his, the child's stepmother, and not the adoptive mother. Keep that in mind. This has been asked in the pre-examination. This, okay. Now fourth is where a widow or an unmarried woman adopts a child, any husband whom she marries subsequently shall be deemed to be stepfather of the adopted. Same is the case with the women. Okay. Now next is section 15, valid adoption not to be cancelled. No adoption which has been validly made can be cancelled by the adoptive father or mother or any other person, nor can the adopted child renounce his or her status as such and return to the family of his or her birth. So if a adoption has validly been made, it can't be cancelled by anyone. It's either the father, adoptive father, or the adoptive mother, or the natural guardians, or the child himself. It cannot be ended, cancelled. This is important. Keep the section in mind. Next we have section 16, presumption as to registered documents relating to adoption. Whenever any document registered under any law for the time being in force is produced before any court purporting to record an adoption made and is signed by the person giving and the person making the child in adoption, the court shall presume that the adoption has been made in compliance with the provisions of this act unless and until it is disproved. So court will presume that the papers are right and the adoption was made validly. Section 17 is prohibition of certain payments. No person shall receive or agree to receive any payment or other reward in consideration of the adoption. And no person shall make or give or agree to make or give to any other person any payment or reward, the receipt of which is prohibited by this section. So no payment or reward for adoption, for giving in adoption or taking in adoption. If any person contravenes the provisions of subsection 1, he shall be punishable with imprisonment which may extend to 6 months or with fine or with both. Important, keep that in mind. If you are guilty, if you're found guilty of taking or giving a reward or payment for giving or taking a child in adoption, then the punishment is 6 month extendable, imprisonment extendable up to 6 months or with fine or with both. Then no prosecution under this section shall be instituted without the previous sanction of the state government or an officer authorized by the state government in this behalf. So in order to file a complaint under this section, you need permission of the state government or officer authorized by the state government. Now the next chapter is chapter 3rd, maintenance. This was the last chapter. We have 3 chapters only. Section 18, which talks about the maintenance of wife. This is important. This has been asked many a times and you should learn it by heart. Section 18 is maintenance of wife. Subject to the provisions of this section, a Hindu wife, whether married before or after the commencement of this act, shall be entitled to be maintained by her husband during her lifetime. Hindu wife shall be entitled to live separately from her husband without forfeiting her claim to maintenance. When she is allowed to live separately without forfeiting her claim is if he is guilty of desertion, if he has deserted, if the husband has deserted the wife, that is to say, of abandoning her without reasonable cause and without her consent or against her wish, or willfully neglecting her. All these terms are important, keep that in mind. If he has treated her with such cruelty as to cause a reasonable apprehension in her mind that it will be harmful or injurious to live with her husband, then also she has a right to live separately and get the maintenance as well. Now D is if he has any other wife living. E is if he keeps a concubine in the same house in which his wife is living or habitually resides with a concubine elsewhere. Then if he has ceased to be a Hindu by conversion to another religion. Or G is if there is any other cause justifying her living separately, then she can live separately and claim maintenance as well. Section 18, maintenance of the wife. Third is a Hindu wife shall not be entitled to separate residence and maintenance from her husband if she is unchaste. Keep that in mind. When she won't be entitled to live separately and get maintenance, if she is unchaste or ceased to be a Hindu by conversion to another religion, then she can't claim maintenance under this section. Now section 19 is maintenance of widowed daughter-in-law. A Hindu wife, whether married before or after the commencement of this act, shall be entitled to be maintained after the death of her husband by her father-in-law. Section 19 talks about when the father-in-law is bound to maintain the Hindu wife. Provided and to the extent that she is unable to maintain herself, she should not be able to maintain herself out of her own earning or other property, or where she has no property of her own, is unable to obtain maintenance from the estate of her husband or her father or mother, her own father and mother, from her son or daughter, if any, or his or her estate. Any obligation under subsection 1 shall not be enforceable if the father-in-law has not the means to do so from any copartnership property in his possession out of which the daughter-in-law has not obtained any share, and any such obligation shall cease on the remarriage of the daughter-in-law, and if in case she remarries, the right will cease. Next is section 20, maintenance of children and aged parents. Now all these sections are important. 18 is about the wife, 19 is about the daughter-in-law when father-in-law is responsible to maintain. Then section 20 is of children and aged parents. So subject to the provisions of this section, a Hindu is bound during his or her lifetime to maintain his or her legitimate or illegitimate children and his or her aged or infirm parents. A legitimate or illegitimate child may claim maintenance from his or her father or mother so long as the child is minor. Legitimate, illegitimate, till the time the child is minor. From father or mother. The obligation of a person to maintain his or her aged or infirm parents or a daughter who is unmarried extends insofar as the parent or the unmarried daughter, as the case may be, is unable to maintain himself or herself out of his or her own earning or other property. If they are capable of maintaining themselves, then the son or the daughter or the father or the mother are not liable. Explanation in this section: parent includes a childless stepmother. This is important, keep that in mind. Wherever there is an exception to section, it becomes important by default. Section 21 is dependents defined. It defines who are dependents. So for the purpose of this chapter, dependents mean the following relatives of the deceased: his or her father, then mother, his widow, so long as she does not remarry, his or her son or the son of his predeceased son or the son of predeceased son of his predeceased son, again three generations, so long as he is a minor, provided and to the extent that he is unable to obtain maintenance in the case of grandson from his father's or mother's estate, and in the case of a great grandson from the estate of his father or mother or father's father or father's mother. His or her unmarried daughter or the unmarried daughter of his predeceased son or the unmarried daughter of a predeceased son of his predeceased son, so long as she remains unmarried, provided and to the extent that she is unable to obtain maintenance in the case of granddaughter from her father's or mother's estate, as in the case of great granddaughter from the estate of his father or mother or father's mother. his widowed daughter provided, and to the extent that she is unable to obtain maintenance from the estate of her husband, from her son or daughter in any, if any, from her father-in-law or his father or the estate of either of them, any widow of his son or of a son of his predeceased son, so long as she does not remarry, provided, and to the extent that she is unable to obtain maintenance from her husband's estate or from her son or daughter, if any, or his or her estate, or in the case of grandson's widow, also from father-in-law estate. Section is not important. Moving on, let's read this too as well. His or her minor illegitimate son, so long as he remains minor. His or her illegitimate daughter, so long as she remains unmarried. So minority clause is not there in case of daughters. Now, section 22, maintenance of dependents. Subject to the provision of subsection 2, the heirs of a deceased Hindu are bound to maintain the dependents of the deceased out of the estate inherited by them from the deceased. So they are bound to the extent of the estate inherited by them. Where a dependent has not obtained by testamentary or intestate succession any share in the estate of a Hindu dying after the commencement of this act, the dependent shall be entitled, subject to the provision of this act, to maintain from those who take the estate. The liability of each of the person who takes the estate shall be in proportion to the value of the share or part of the estate taken by him or her, notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 2 or subsection 3. No person who is himself or herself a dependent shall be liable to contribute to the maintenance of others if he or she has obtained a share or part of the value of which is or would, if the liability to contribute were enforced, become less than what would be rewarded to him or her by way of maintenance under this act. Again, this is not important. You don't need to note it. Coming to section 23, amount of maintenance. It shall be in the discretion of the court to determine whether any, and if so, what maintenance shall be awarded under the provision of this act, and in doing so, the court shall have due regard to the considerations set out in subsection 2 or subsection 3, as the case may be, so far as they are applicable. In determining the amount of maintenance, if any, to be awarded to a wife, children, or aged or infirm parent under this act, regard shall be made to the position and status of the parties, the reasonable wants of the claimant, if the claimant is living separately, whether the claimant is justified in doing so, the value of the claimant's property and any income derived from such property or from the claimant's own earning or from any other source, number of persons entitled to maintenance under this act. In determining the amount of maintenance, if any, to be awarded to a dependent under this act, regard shall be had to the net value of the estate of the deceased after providing for the payment of his debt. Provision, if any, made under a will of the deceased in respect of the dependent, degree of relationship between the two, reasonable wants of the dependent, the past relation between the dependent and the deceased, the value of the property of the dependent, and any income derived from such property or from his or her earning or from any other sources, the number of dependents entitled to maintenance under this act. Not important, forget. Section 24 is about claimant to maintenance should be a Hindu. No person shall be entitled to claim maintenance under this chapter if he or she has ceased to be a Hindu by conversion or any other religion. So if you are not a Hindu anymore, the act won't apply to you. So obviously you can't claim maintenance under this act. Amount of maintenance may be altered or changed of circumstances. The amount of maintenance, whether fixed by a decree of court or by an agreement either before or after the commencement of this act, may be altered subsequently if there is a material change in the circumstances. So it can be altered under section 25. Then we have section 26. It talks about debts to have priority. Subject to the provisions contained in section 27, debts of every description contracted or payable by the deceased shall have priority over the claims of his dependents or maintenance under this act. Again, this is not important. I can't recall any question which has been asked in previous examination regarding the debt to have priority. Moving on to section 27, maintenance when to be charged. A dependent's claim for maintenance under this act shall not be charged on the estate of the deceased or any portion thereof unless one has been created by the will of the deceased, by a decree of court, by agreement between the dependent and the owner of the estate or portion, or otherwise. Now section 28 talks about the effect of transfer of property on right to maintenance. So it says that dependent will have a right to receive maintenance out of the estate or part of the estate that is transferred only if the transfer was made gratuitous or if the transferee had a notice of the right of maintenance. But if the transfer was for consideration and without notice of the right, then the dependent cannot claim any maintenance from that state. Chapter 4 is about repeals and saving. 29 talks about repeal, which has itself been repealed. 30 is saving. Nothing contained in this act shall affect any adoption made before the commencement of this act, and the validity and effect of any such adoption shall be determined as if the act has not been passed. If the adoption has been made before the commencement of this act, then it won't be affected by any of the provisions of this act. So yeah, that's it. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll try to wind up as many acts as possible before the Bihar Judiciary pre-exam, and yeah, that's it.